On January 24, 2024, Russia's newly formed Africa Corps published the first images of a deployment to Burkina Faso on its Telegram channel. According to a statement, this Russian contingent of 100 people was deployed to ensure the safety of the country's leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and the Burkinabe people from terrorist attacks. The deployment to Burkina Faso has fueled intense speculation on the restructuring of the Russian private military company Wagner Group's operations in Africa since the death of its founders Yevgeny Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin in a mysterious plane crash in August 2023. From the Central African Republic to Libya, through Mali and Sudan, Russia has been consistently gaining ground across Africa over the past decade. Moscow owes its success in Africa in large part to one man, the late Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led the notorious Wagner Group. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the rise of Wagner Group's African operations and how the group has now been rebranded as the Africa Corps following the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Wagner Group first came to widespread attention in 2014 when its mercenaries are thought to have been involved in the Russian annexation of Crimea and fighting in eastern Ukraine. They are also believed to have been involved in the Syrian war, supporting Russian armed forces which intervened on the side of President Bashar al-Assad in 2015. Starting from the late 2010s, Wagner became firmly entrenched in different parts of Africa. Its leader was Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was dubbed Putin's chef. Prigozhin had moved from the actual catering business into the private military contractor business. In Africa, the Wagner Group was involved in security protection and election meddling to the benefit of local partners in exchange for deals for access to natural resources including oil, gold, diamonds, and uranium. Its activities also included the intertwining of boots on the ground with propaganda and disinformation. Wagner also leveraged technologies and a sophisticated network of financing to enhance combat capabilities. As a Russian private military company, the Wagner Group became an increasingly significant instrument in the Kremlin's foreign policy toolkit. In some quarters, Wagner was even described as a quasi-state actor and a proxy institution of the Russian state. The Wagner Group allowed the Russian government to operate in overseas conflicts at arm's length, projecting power while maintaining a degree of deniability. That distance also allowed this PMC to operate outside the typical bounds of state warfare, engaging in campaigns of terror and disinformation in a way that the conventional Russian army could not. The Central African Republic is the most prominent case of the Wagner entrenchment in Africa. The Wagner Group emerged in that country in late 2017. Initially, Wagner appeared as a private military company rendering military advisory services to the Central African Republic head of state, President Faustin Archange Touadéra. As the president would later explain, he was desperate to find outside assistance to quell the civil war that was taking place in that country, and Russia was the only country willing to send weapons and fighters, the latter being Wagner mercenaries. But the Wagner Group's activities in that country had allegedly gone far beyond advisory services, including the facilitation of weapons shipment and military training. In exchange for providing personal security, military training, and combat resistance, the Wagner Group gained direct access to the Central African Republic's natural resources, including the Ndasima gold mining site, which Wagner-linked operatives had significantly expanded by the year 2023. This Russian presence in the CAR was at first welcomed by that country's population, but their popularity waned after reports increasingly indicated severe human rights violations against civilians as reported by the United Nations. Wagner was also active in Libya, a country that was plunged into turmoil in the aftermath of the NATO intervention in 2011 when NATO backed an uprising that toppled Muammar Gaddafi as leader. It could be argued that the elimination of Gaddafi and the chaos that ensued after his death opened the door for Wagner in Libya. In this instance, the group was providing combat assistance to the strongman General Khalifa Haftar in eastern Libya in his fight against the internationally recognized government based in Tripoli. As well as bringing in Syrian fighters as mercenaries, Wagner worked alongside foreign fighters from Sudan, Chad, and elsewhere around the world. By supporting General Haftar, Wagner put itself in a position to control Libyan oil production in the country's southwest fields. Wagner also exercised de facto control over an important network of military and air bases in Libya. Sudan constitutes another noteworthy case of the Wagner deployment. Wagner emerged as an actor in that country in 2017, which coincided with the public confirmation by the Russian government that a meeting with then-President Omar al-Bashir took place in Sochi, Russia. Following the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir in 2019 and the ongoing political-military turmoil in Sudan, various sources have claimed that through Libya, Wagner provided military assistance and equipment to Sudan's paramilitary forces and their leader Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo in his fight over the country's civilian leadership. According to international observers, the Wagner Group's main goals in Sudan were to ensure Moscow's uninterrupted access to Sudanese gold reserves, to finance its war effort in Ukraine, and to build a naval base at Port Sudan, which would only become possible after the restoration of the Sudanese civilian leadership. The Wagner Group appeared as an actor in Mali at the end of 2021 following the coup d'etat in the country in June 2021. Citing the coup, France reduced its military presence in Mali and in doing so also ended its joint counterinsurgency operations with the Malian state forces. The government of Mali has been fighting an insurgency by fundamentalist Islamist movements, including branches of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Since 2012, France has rendered military assistance to Mali against insurgencies. None of these operations, however, managed to quell the insurgents, and in 2021, the Wagner Group entered the conflict dynamics in the country. Also worth mentioning is the fact that the withdrawal of France from Mali followed political conflict between the two countries, which culminated in the expulsion of the French ambassador to Mali, while the Malian government also announced that it would no longer continue its long-term defense accords with France. Russia thus effectively replaced France as the Malian government's principal security partner. The arrival of Wagner-linked geologists and lawyers also suggested that, similar to Wagner's arrangements in the CAR, Russia had secured mining concessions in exchange for providing the junta with the private military company's services. At the same time, the Wagner Group was accused of committing atrocities in Mali. One of the most well-documented incidents took place in the central Malian town of Mora, where, according to a UN report, at least 500 people are believed to have been summarily executed by Malian troops and armed white men who eyewitnesses described as speaking an unknown language. By June 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin was probably the most feared and famous mercenary in the world. It was around this time that he decided to march on Moscow, ostensibly calling for the removal of the defense minister and the head of the general staff, but in reality threatening Russia's President Vladimir Putin in a way no one had before. Within weeks, Yevgeny Prigozhin had died in a highly suspicious plane crash along with much of the Wagner leadership. Now, as you can imagine, there was widespread speculation at the time about what would happen to the Wagner Group. Well, following Yevgeny Prigozhin's death, the Russian ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense quickly reassured Middle Eastern and African states that it would be business as usual. A short while later, control of Wagner's African operations was then handed over to General Andrei Avernov, who was then head of a secretive Russian operation specializing in targeted killings and destabilizing foreign governments. In early September 2023, accompanied by Russian Deputy Defense Minister Yunusbek Yevkurov, General Avernov began a tour of former Wagner operations in Africa. The two men started in Libya, meeting General Khalifa Haftar. Their next stop was Burkina Faso, where they were greeted by Captain Ibrahim Traore. After that, they landed in the Central African Republic before heading to Mali to meet the leaders of the junta there. On a subsequent trip, they also met General Salifou Modi, one of the military men who seized power in Niger in July 2023. According to various sources in all of these meetings, these two Russian men were reassuring Wagner's partners in Africa that the demise of Prigozhin did not mean the end of his business deals. A few months later, in late November, the French newspaper Le Monde reported that in a telegram channel close to the Russian Defense Ministry, the name Africa Corps had been circulated for the first time. Indeed, the Wagner Group's activities in Africa are now under the direct supervision of the Russian Ministry of Defense. As part of the transformation, the Defense Ministry has renamed the operation the Africa Corps. As such, some of the soldiers involved in this new unit are believed to be former Wagner mercenaries, while others are being recruited in their countries of deployment. This then brings us to January 24, 2024, when Russia's Africa Corps published images of a deployment to Burkina Faso. As I mentioned earlier, the Africa Corps channel on Telegram said the group had flown to Burkina Faso to ensure the safety of the country's leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and the Burkinabe people. Since Burkina Faso's junta took power in September 2022, it has failed to restore security for civilians facing a bloody insurgency by multiple groups of extremist militants that control large swathes of the country. In need of his own protection, Captain Traoré has turned to Russia since the September 2023 arrest of several Burkinabe military officers accused of plotting a coup d'etat against him. Burkina Faso's relations with Moscow have been in the spotlight since it booted out French troops in early 2023, fueling speculation it would deepen security ties with Russia like neighboring Mali. In October 2023, Burkina Faso signed a deal with Russia for the construction of a nuclear power plant to increase the energy supply to this country. In December of the same year, Russia reopened its embassy in Burkina Faso. The embassy was closed in 1992 when Moscow reduced its involvement in Africa following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Additionally, the tense situation in the Sahel has facilitated the Kremlin's expansion of its activities in the region. This rebranding of the Wagner Group to Africa Corps also marks a new phase in Russia's export of security to Africa. The rebranding means that Russia's interventions on the continent are emerging out of the shadows of private initiative and into the limelight of an official state project. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.